So thank you so much for everybody for coming along today. My name's Chris. I manage the local government team here at Amazon. We've got Jack, Katie, and Tobias from the team as well. So we'll be around for the rest of the afternoon and evening. But I just wanted to say a quick hello and welcome you to the office. This is our HQ for the UK. If there shouldn't be a fire alarm, so please follow the signs. If there is, there's an exit just down that way. There's an exit down that way as well. Toilets, if you haven't found them, are just over in that corner, just down the way. And there's drinks and snacks, and there'll be some drinks afterwards as well. So please do stay afterwards. Thank you so much to the representatives from Hackney for joining us today and for sharing their story. And to Maytech as well for helping to coordinate all of this, pull it together, and share their story too. So on that note, I'll pass over to Ian, who's going to kick things off. And like I say, we'll be around all afternoon.
Yes, I'd just like to say thank you to Chris and his team at Amazon for hosting this event here. It's a fabulous facility. Actually, when they showed me around, they were talking about different places we could do it. And as soon as I saw the view, I thought, okay, yeah, this is it. This is the place. So good afternoon and welcome, everybody. What we want to do today, I'm Ian Southwood. I'm the client director of Maytech. And my job this afternoon is to try and facilitate a conversation all about how in public services, local public services, how you transform and modernize legacy and deliver a new set of services. So I'm delighted to have a sort of distinguished panel from Hackney and also from Maytech to help me do that. What's great is that we've got people who are sort of grappling with this challenge every day. How do you modernize and transform local public services? So I'll briefly introduce the panel. So I've got Kate McLaren, who is Head of Delivery at London Borough of Hackney. Next to Kate, we've got Matthew Kane, who is Head of Digital and Data at London Borough of Hackney. Next to Matthew, we've got Reshmi Shetty, who is Development and Integration Manager. And last and certainly least is my colleague Luke Morton, who is Chief Technology Officer at Maytech, but importantly for this afternoon's conversation, has been working with Hackney for the last 12 months or so in all aspects of sort of building new digital services. And so the sort of, I can't quite remember how this came around, Matthew, but we're talking about the challenges of how do you create and transform and deliver new digital services in local public sector whilst you're trying to sort of keep the lights on and keep existing services running, whilst you modernize legacy platforms and integrate all these new services together, designing services in the first place around users, keeping all the stakeholders in sort of local government happy, which is a full-time job in itself. And how do you do that under a constant sort of need to reduce your overall spend in IT? And so that was kind of what we were kicking around, and this team bravely said, oh, okay, yeah, we'll run a session when we talk about that. So they might be regretting that now, but we'll find out. So I just sort of talk about how we want to run this afternoon and how we think it's going to work. So what's going to happen is that Matthew, Kate, and Reshmi are sort of going to kick off with, okay, so what are the challenges in sort of transforming local public services, and what's been their approach in doing that? They're going to cover sort of 5 key areas. So they're going to do that first. So maybe take sort of 10, 15 minutes to do that, and then I'm going to ask sort of Luke to talk about some of the technology aspects, maybe some of the upskilling parts, building capabilities, and then we'll have a sort of panel discussion. But then we want to sort of throw that open to everybody here. So we've got a roving microphone, and we've got cards in front of you. So you can write questions down on the cards as you think of them, and we can collect those. Or we can just, as we throw it open, we can walk around with microphones and ask questions for the panel, and they just get into discussion. So I think we'll sort of spend 60 minutes or so doing that and see what everyone's appetite is at the end. And then we've got drinks from sort of 6:15, and we sort of want everybody just to have a chat. One of the sort of ideas around this was just having a networking event and sort of, talking to the team from Hackney and everybody else about, so what's your approach? Where is your approach different? What are your unique set of challenges? Where's there some commonality? So we want to do that over drinks as well. Does that sound okay for everybody? Okay, so without further ado then, Matthew, I'm going to hand over to you.
Cool.
You've got a roving microphone and you've got one of these things.
So just a bit of context about how we've come to where we are, but also I hope, and very much not on brand, but a sufficient modesty around how much more we have to learn, not least from all the good people in the room, because we're kind of halfway through a thing, and we know how much more we've still got to uncover. Just a bit of context for what we're doing in IT in Hackney. So the Hackett Manifesto, as the team chose to call it, is our founding constitution, if you will. It's our point of, unfortunately, 11 principles, at Rob Miller 31 to blame for that, which determine to the team this is how we want to work with each other. This is how we want to work with our colleagues across the council, but more importantly, we're here for people in the borough. And that was the kind of the first point at which the team was saying we want to be the most user-centered team in the country, which is our mission. So that kind of underpins everything that came next. Why we wanted to talk about the challenge of migrating from legacy software while keeping the lights on is because the way we came about the journey was really interesting. The chief executive of Hackney Council said, what I want is cloud first, I want REST APIs, and I want them in 3 months' time. No, of course he didn't. No one asked for cloud hosting. No one asked for REST APIs. No one even asked for digital services so good people prefer to use them. In fact, what happened was the Hackney Housing used to be what's known in the terminology as an ALMO, an arm's length management organisation. It had gone out from Hackney Council to being an ALMO in order to attract government funds. It was not considered to be particularly successful as an ALMO, and eventually it came back in-house, because if you don't know what to do in the public sector, you reorganise things. So Hackney Housing Services was coming back in-house, and the chief did say, well, if I'm taking responsibility for this, I need to make sure it's going to be better run than it has been in the recent past. And one of those ways it needs to be better run is it needed a new system. And the chief had been in position long enough to remember the buying of the new system when it was a new system, and now it's an old system. And he said, the last thing I want to do is to recreate all our broken business processes on this new system, which was a bold thing for a local authority chief executive to say. This started out as a systems and process review. That was led, in fact, by Stuart and friends from FutureGov. And that concluded kind of 3 months after I joined the council. And at that point, we sort of airily thought, oh, well, it's obvious, isn't it? You build some new stuff in the cloud and people start using the new stuff and then they stop using the old stuff. And we were very clear that that was the key driver of how you were going to create a modern set of housing services for our tenants and leaseholders in Hackney. We've got 28,000 across some 16,000 properties. Actually, what we learned is that this wasn't just about the wholesale transformation of housing services. Actually, this was about the wholesale transformation of IT too. So why is this so hard? Well, simply because of the 5 things we've put on the screen. Why those 5 things? Yeah, because they cover pretty much everything, don't they? Because actually, if it's not about leadership processes, skills, governance, or culture, it kind of isn't a thing, is it? So why is this so hard? Because this is about everything. This was about transforming the way that housing services worked with its tenants and leaseholders, the way it manages its properties. But then that also asks some fundamental questions about how we do IT in Hackney, questions that we know now are asked, and thanks to people like Made and AWS as being able to start to answer. So just to kind of summarize those before we can start talking about them in more depth with each other. Leadership, it's not really about the chief exec saying he wants a thing, because if it was that easy, everything the chief exec asked for would be done by now, wouldn't it? The leadership point that we've learned is that the real challenge is about that sort of golden thread from actually directors through to frontline staff. So we've been working with product owners who, in old school prints, we would have called them subject matter experts. We've been very careful that most of those aren't our old subject matter experts from our Prince 2 days, and we've recruited a different set of willing and able people. But getting that continuity from people very close to the front line saying, here's how it needs to work, here's what our tenants and leaseholders need, through to the director setting the big vision, that's difficult enough. In housing services, we happen to have swapped out the whole senior management team since we started this program just, 14 months ago. So managing that has also been non-trivial, and helping the service work in new ways across some very distinct services in repairs, in property and asset management, in tenancy and leaseholder services. That is also really hard. So maintaining that golden thread for us from directors to frontline staff and back again has been our first big key challenge.
So of course, to build any kind of cloud-based APIs, what do we need? We need skills. So something which was not embedded within Hackney, like 12 months back, if I see it, we were like literally basic programmers working on SOAP, web services, file drops. I can literally show it, the whole diagram in that. So obviously the first challenge to build the basic skills within the team, get them work in the new technology. If you want to go from on-prem monolithic architecture to cloud, you need to have those things embedded within the team. So we worked on the pair programming, we worked with Maytech predominantly and other agencies as well to work on the pair programming, TDDs, DevOps culture, security, and there's lots of others, Docker, containerized mechanism. Now we are currently working on infrastructure as code, which is a pretty cool thing that we are trying to build up in team. But of course, this is the main thing that we have to get it embedded. It allows us to have a product ownership as well, and taking responsibility, whatever we build or whatever we deploy on cloud should be public. People should be able to access it. That's a major that was major hurdles. If I see, I'm sure my team will agree on that one. But yeah, so those were the things that we wanted to work on, build on those core skills, get the team, embrace it, recognize their strengths and weaknesses, and work on it. So if something that's we are not so good at it, try to work on it, get it done. And yeah, that was pretty much the start of our whole journey. And obviously the agile delivery was pretty new for us at that time. So we adopted it and we have embraced it quite well actually. So next was confidence to fail and then succeed. So as Matthew mentioned, that we believe in something fail in a fortnight. So for that, you need to be confident and also be confident to embrace the thing. Okay, it's fine to fail, but make sure you learn from it and go about it. Think about the next steps. So we had this philosophy that it's okay to refactor your code. Look at, so 12 months back, we delivered 9 APIs, but they were all service oriented. They were not reusable. They were only focused to one particular service. It wasn't satisfy the need for other services. What's the point of having so many APIs, which doesn't do the need? So right now we are working on API Factory, which is like producing very data-driven microservices, making sure it can be reused, and thereby we are reducing the delivery time. So that's why we are confident that we are happy to fail, but we are happy to work from that and learn from it and go forward from that one.
So in terms of processes for us as an IT function, we restructured in April last year, and our structure is already looking, frankly, not fit for purpose, given how much we've learned about cloud, continuous deployment, everything from the way we, when we consider whether to buy, build, rent, through to the kind of old style acceptance into service process. It's all broken. None of it's fit for what we need. The shift in mentality from sort of buy and operate and blame the supplier when it goes wrong to build and iterate is substantial. It's challenging our teams, our silos, our ways of working. The way our team's now talking about it, so whereas previously we had a digital team and we had some cool agencies putting some stuff up on Heroku that we didn't really understand, but it looked quite nice. Now actually, this is for everyone. Was I going to say that too? So a kind of integral bit to that is we started off with a model of an empowered team. So that was quite simply an agency that came in with a brief to build a thing. And we seconded a couple of people from Hackney IT into that team, Selwyn was one of them, to learn about those ways of working. And that product team could work in a hermetically sealed bubble. It wasn't quite a hermetically sealed bubble, it was a basement in a repairs depot. It was slightly colder than a hermetically sealed bubble. But that kind of work in splendid isolation actually broke down fairly quickly. What we learned is that this, you know, it's easy, you just go cloud, you're moving something from one person's server to another, right? Yeah. It's a far more comprehensive change than we'd anticipated. It means from our service desk, changing the way that they work, our applications management. You know, we don't reboot the server when the system's down anymore. We don't pass tickets from service desk to applications management, who then reassign it to developers and then reassign it to master data, as we used to do in the old days. So that kind of that culture of let's empower a team to work together to solve a problem has really grown up from that very small, let's get a product team to do a thing, to being a whole system change.
So part of that is around, another part of our story is around picking up new partnerships as we went. So talking about Selwyn being seconded into a team with an agency, talking about bringing agencies in and getting our teams to work with those agencies. We're developing all these new partnerships with people who have different ways of working. And one of the ways that we do that is because this is one of our fundamental core principles, which is around working in the open by default. So it's in our Hackett manifesto. It's one of the core governance principles that we have. And this, I think, is what actually powers quite a lot of what we're doing in terms of our culture, because we're starting to role model and show that if you put something out there, it's okay. It's okay if it's not perfect. It's okay if you share as you're going. You don't have to wait for some big launch. You can put something out there and then you can change it and you can get feedback and you can talk about what you're doing as you're going. And that we're working in the open within the team. So within our own larger team, people are doing show and tells. They're talking about their work. They're talking about when things don't go well. They're talking about when it does go well. They're also doing things publicly as well. So working in the open by default, I think, is one of the main drivers of how we've got to where we've got to at the moment. And governance was one of the things that Matthew put up on the first slide. I think this has been really key to actually maintaining the pace and being able to deliver. And governance, I think, is often the thing that really slows you down. So if your governance is old-fashioned and it consists of project boards and papers and RAG ratings and all the things that we all have sat through, you're not going to be able to deliver at pace. You have to empower the team. So when I arrived last June, the team had already torn up all the old governance that they had because it wasn't working for them. And we put some new stuff in place. And we started with 5 key principles, the first of which is trust the team. The team is where most decisions should be made because they're the ones who know what the decision is and know how to make it. If a decision affects more than one team, then the team should talk to each other and then they should communicate what they've done. If it affects all of us, then maybe we do need to do something a bit more formal. We probably do need to have a bigger meeting. We maybe need to discuss it with other people. If we work in the open by default, that reduces the amount of formal governance that we need to have because everything is there in the open, that you can see what's happening. And then the 5th principle is around working to standards. So we have some really clear guidance and some really clear standards about what we expect from teams so they know what good looks like, they know what they're trying to achieve.
So in terms of just framing kind of what you think of that, really, we wondered, of the things we've learned, which of those strikes a chord, which of those has you sat there thinking, yeah, that's my everyday. How do you, based on what you've heard from us, actually, how can we better sustain the case for change? We're halfway through a journey. We've got over some hurdles, but we haven't done the ugly bits yet. We're still running universal housing in the background. It's now much more of a background database, but it's still there. The project to migrate from universal housing could be presented as unstarted. So how can we better sustain that case for change? What do you think we're going to learn next? So we've learned all of this in action. We didn't know any of this to begin with. Thank God we didn't, because, you know, but we've learned this in action. So based on your experience, what do you think we might be learning over the next 6 to 12 months? And we've been massively fortunate to learn from AWS, to learn from MAID, and particularly the 7 core digital agencies that have worked with us so frequently. But where else can we learn from? Who's doing it well? Which organisations might surprise us that we could learn from? So that would really help accelerate our learning too.
Great, thanks, Matthew. Thanks, guys. So what I'd like to do is probably just ask Luke to sort of talk about, from a technology perspective, just about sort of transforming services and transforming them quickly. I've got some questions to ask you around that. And actually, I've got some questions. We asked you when you registered to submit questions, and would you believe some of you did? So I've got to read some of those out shortly. But we'll just get Luke's perspective. We'll ask some of those questions of the panel, and then we'll open up for everybody to have a discussion. So Luke, from a technology perspective, do you want to cover?
Yeah, so I think it's much broader than technology, though. We started working with Hackney around a year ago, actually, bang on. And I was really excited for Hackney to already be venturing into the realms of using techniques like APIs surrounding legacy systems, already aware of these concepts. And you listed a load of practices that you might not have been completely practicing in full, but the awareness was beginning to be there. The willingness was there, and I think ultimately the courage, and I'll come back to that, but we weren't just brought in to deliver services. We were actually brought in to help build new skills within the team as well, and that is typically pretty hard for an outside organisation to come in and to try and introduce new skills. I've certainly been in environments where teams haven't been as open or as willing or as courageous to be able to bring on these things. And so actually, I just wanted to highlight the fact that I think it's this willingness to want to take new ways of working and actually work with partners and suppliers to actually not just deliver a thing in isolation, but actually to start to partner, to start to build the capabilities, the digital skills that we need. And we all know those things evolve, and sometimes organisations slow in their learning, and then begin to bring in new people, like you say, and want to effectively push forward with their technology. And I think ultimately this is about better meeting user needs, and I think actually starting to use technologies or ways of working that can kind of enable that is really important. So I think one of the key things from a technology point of view that we've been doing is kind of accepting that legacy can't just be replaced straight away. You can't take out these huge systems that business processes are heavily bought into, although they've got lots of paper workarounds and lots of things just to make it work. But there's an acceptance that is a reality, and you're not just going to come and change everything. And I think the approach that's at least been taken at Hackney, and I'd be really interested to hear other people's approaches to this, but it has been to how do we free some of this information from these older systems? How do we begin to put APIs around these older systems so that they do become more like databases, but actually enable us to free that data and actually build services that actually meet the business need, the user need, and actually can help evolve business processes at the same time as reimagining digital services, both internally for Hackney staff, but also externally for Hackney residents as well. And yeah, I think the thing that really warms my heart and makes me excited about working with Hackney is that courage. Rashmi's always really excited every time we talk about a new concept that we kind of want to introduce or start developing with, and I think actually that's where a lot of this starts. It starts from having a few people in your team with a lot of courage, brave. Yeah, so I'm really excited for the future really of Hackney, and I'm really interested actually to understand how other organisations are beginning to tackle this kind of legacy estate and whether building these kinds of digital skills is feasible for everyone, and what the constraints. And I'm really interested in that tonight.
Okay, thanks, Luke. So firstly, can I just ask, show of hands, do all these challenges that we've just described, do they strike a chord with anybody working in local public services? Yes? Anyone not? Anyone got the answer? Okay. Okay. All right, we'll come back to you. So if you start to have a think about the questions, I'm going to just ask the first question, if that's okay, because I'm really interested in your second point about how do you sustain this change, and talking about governance, and I like you're proposing a lightweight governance process. So in local government, when funding is so difficult to get hold of, how do you sustain a change in a transformation program? And how do you make sure that you're keeping stakeholders on side? How do you get funding for that? And then how do you align? So you talked about empowering the team as well, and how do you empower the team and align those to business stakeholders? So can you just sort of talk a bit more about how do you approach that?
So there are some really obvious things which are true. It's just they're necessary but insufficient. So the first thing we did is build Pay My Rent, and we built Pay My Rent in 12 weeks, and within 3 months we'd taken a third of calls out of the neighbourhood's contact centre. That's pretty cool, right? So it had cost us, what, 60 grand to build ish, and more people were using it than told our surveys they would be prepared to use a council service. And that immediate benefit was very tangible to the Director of Housing. Didn't matter for a job for anyone who wasn't in the Director of Housing or on the Neighbourhoods Contact Centre, because it didn't affect them. So yes, you build services and you case study your success and all of those good things, but it isn't as straightforward as that. And of course, people we've been on an IT journey about why we want to change, but for lots of our colleagues, they haven't also been exposed to that thinking. So they might go to housing conferences, and they might say X authorities just bought Orchard, or X authorities just bought Northgate. Other bad solutions are also available from disreputable vendors. And so they hear that we're building our own software. Oh, hold on, but you can't even get my computer to work in the mornings. So that feels strange, it feels threatening, and it would be perfectly reasonable for people to assume that was wrong. So yeah, do the successful things and make sure you make you get sufficient credit from that, but it isn't as straightforward as that. You need to keep winning the original argument long past the point at which you thought it had already been won.
I think just to add to that, in your introduction to that question, and it's not a criticism, the word user wasn't, it was about business processes, stakeholders, politics, budgets, etc. But it is actually about the user. So it's something Luke said and Matthew said and Rashmi said. It's that relentless focus on user need that says that the user is trying to do something, and what we need to do is empower them to do it. And at the moment, the way they're doing it is making it really inefficient for us to deliver our service, or actually we can take some cost out of this service, or actually this will just make it easier for someone to engage, and therefore down the line. But it's getting, I think one of our challenges is to get better at describing those benefits and describing how it's going to benefit the user in terms that our stakeholders understand. But it is that relentless focus on bringing the user back into the conversation every time.
Right. Good. Thank you. So who wants to ask a question? And Delphine, do you have a roving microphone? Oh, Ian has a roving microphone. Okay, very good. Anyone want to ask the first question?
We have a volunteer.
Oh, we do.
I suspect this is something that we all struggle with. We have quite a diverse set of places where projects come from, demand comes from. I think that's quite polite, isn't it? Yeah. How do you manage that sort of competition between the streams of projects? Oh, I'm sorry, I can be a bit loud, so I'm trying to speak quietly. How do you manage that stream of projects whilst not going back to something that I had at one stage when somebody said, well, we've only got 50 projects. Why don't you do 50 projects at once with 2 teams, you know? Because they could split their time, couldn't they? So they'd be doing like one day a month on each project.
'Cause we
It'll
all
be
know-
fine.
We all
And
know how
in
effective that is.
15 years' time, we might have something.
Right. And that's
That manager's now left, but the thinking remains.
and it's right, and it's on a spreadsheet. And every month we've got to go to the meeting to explain why the thing that's 45th on the spreadsheet still hasn't been done because 2 years ago someone made a commitment for it to be done. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it's okay because it's amber.
Oh, if I ever find Amber.
Well, so our approach was, so I think we're running something like 40-something projects at the moment, and we can sometimes get trapped in a slightly ethereal what is a project, when is it not. But if you look at pipeline.localgov.digital, I think you'll see our 40-odd projects. And plan A, which has been pretty effective, was to go, oh yeah, there's loads of noise there that we don't quite understand, so let's get people inspired, excited by this new thing. And actually that was reasonably effective at turning off some of the legacy requests and being able to say to people, well, actually this thing that we've been trying to do for 2 years, we could better do this other thing. The second thing was being really clear with the team. So one of our 11 manifesto principles was no crossed out. Ironically, design missed the crossing out, so I have to re-cross it out every time we build the slides. And that was about having a culture where we don't have an IT strategy and we don't have a digital strategy because we have service plans enabled by technology and data. So we never wanted an IT department saying we are closed for business. So the question is, yes, if it benefits users sufficiently and there's budget to do it. So that's the kind of, but then Kate and her delivery team actually have to bear the responsibility for this.
Yes. But yes, it's the yes if. It's great. That sounds like a great idea. Tell us a bit more about it. We have a new process that we've come up with, with the teams come up with actually, which is how do we test out that idea for wherever it's come from and get it into a good enough shape that we could then say, okay, that is a thing that we think we should do. And the yes if is about saying, great, let's have a conversation about it. How many users does it benefit? What's it going to bring us? Are you trying to buy a thing because your business process is actually broken? Can we have a conversation? Let's take a bit of a step back from the thing. I talk about this quite a lot. So I'm fairly new to IT. I used to work in comms. And when you work in comms, what you get a lot is someone coming in saying, I'd like a leaflet. And a bad comms team will say, that's fantastic. How many would you like? When do you want them? And how many colours would you like it in?
Can I have a pen?
Can I have a pen? Oh, yeah. Well, no, that's okay. The answer's no to that. No, you can't. But a leaflet's a bit trickier. And I think in IT, it's the same thing. People come along and say, I'd like this piece of shiny software because someone's talked about it at a housing conference, or my friend over in a different local authority's got one and says it's brilliant. And it's about saying, that's really interesting. Tell me a little bit more about the problem you are trying to solve and the users and where are they in this? What is actually happening, and unpicking it. And I think
the final bit to add is there was a point when I was so giddy with excitement of working in Hackney that I thought our capacity might almost be infinitely scalable, a bit like Hackney running on AWS. And there was a period of about 3 months in March last year before Kate arrived, where I was guilty of horrendous mismanagement of the start of a bunch of projects. And it was because we'd assumed that you could write a brief on digital marketplace, you could bring in a digital agency, you could give them a really clear challenge to solve. And as long as there's a pot of money, you could bring in these cool people who'd go and sit in the corner and build this thing. And what we've learned actually is that the role of particularly our delivery managers, in ensuring that we've got all of that stakeholder management right, we understand the problem that it's there to solve, we really understand, we've got a collective understanding of user needs and so on and so forth, means that funnily enough, our capacity isn't infinitely scalable. We can only work with as many third-party agencies as we have internal capacity to manage. So another part of our journey has been, again, very sort of airily and optimistically. 2 years ago, I began thinking, well, we'll just have some agencies who'll buy some Heroku instances and they'll build a thing, and presumably they'll use the GovUK design pattern, because why wouldn't you? And then they'll all just work, and the chances are they'll run Ruby on Rails, because most of our local agencies do, but we'll figure that out as we go. And what we've learned now, and you'll see it by the selection criteria we use on digital marketplace, is we've started to become much more specific about some of the things around our standards. because the playbook sets out how we want to write APIs. We want our partner agencies to reflect the diversity of our local borough. It's no longer good enough if you turn up with a bunch of middle-aged white men, with all respect to myself, because that's not Hackney the place. And so we've got much more specific about those two. So yeah, a growth mindset, but not infinitely.
So the follow-up question then, you touched on this, because and it's one of my things is the ongoing thing. So you create things, and then a thing is made, and it doesn't have the characteristics of a table, which is that you buy it and you plonk it on the floor, and basically it'll sit there for 10, 20 years. It's fine. You might have to give it a wipe occasionally, but basically it's fine. You know, providing it's a good enough table in the first place. It's like that. People expect software to be like that. Unfortunately, it's not. You know, you have to support it. You have to maintain it. People want to change it. The world changes around it. How do you manage that piece? So you've got this finite capacity, which is slowly filling up with sludge. You know, how do you manage that challenge?
Well, partly we're expanding as well, so the team's
okay. All right. So
it isn't a finite set of people. We're recruiting delivery managers all the time. Anyone wants to come and work at Hackney as a delivery manager, come and see me afterwards. Recruiting at the moment. So the capacity is getting bigger.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad you asked that question, because we've been talking about this internally. This is our next big challenge, I think, is how do we go from sometimes it's called projects to products. How do you build a team that looks after something, builds it, looks after it, maintains it, improves it, iterates it, and actually, equally importantly, retires it properly. Yeah. And that's the bit that often falls off the end, doesn't it? Yeah. So I think that's one of our next big challenges.
Just as an example, so Pay My Rent, this thing that we were really proud of, that we built first in this project, went live. 3 months later, Tom, I'm so glad he's not here. Tom came to me and said, "Did you know that we've had a drop in calls in the NCC of a third?" I was like, "That's great," but we hadn't noticed, because we built this product. We got on with them building the online repairs, and we'd actually not had anyone actually looking at GA to find out how many people were using this bloody thing. So we're a long way further from that. Now we're starting to ask questions about DevOps and the role of applications management and continuous deployment and what that means, but we've got an awful lot more to learn.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Got one over here. Thank you, Ian. We have the next question from over this side. That'd be great.
Hello, I'm Martin Evans from Unboxed. Just following on from the previous question, we know that software needs continuous investment, needs change, policies change, and we all wonder whether any single local authority can afford to keep investing in software that it needs to run its services. And it seems obvious that the answer is in collaboration across councils. One of the things and working in the open is enormously helpful for that. But one of the things I've noticed is that it's very hard to get other councils to buy in after the event. You have to get them to buy in early. And when you're doing so much great work to work this stuff out, and it's all very messy, how are you challenging that kind of collaboration early on when, there aren't many councils that are at the place Hackney are at? That's my question. And I think you've already acknowledged it's the next big challenge, but I just specifically around that collaboration with other councils.
Well, I've just come from a meeting with the borough commander. Collaboration across councils is difficult. Collaboration in place is hard too. We continuously grapple with how health and local authority work together, with how local authority and police work together, and so on and so forth. So it's certainly not just a local government size challenge. I think Rashmi's point about integrations, I think, stands absolutely for collaborations too. So you can go for the sort of vertically integrated, let's try and build a magic box which runs the whole service for many councils, and it's really nice to see colleagues from Camden still living after the shared service experience that they've been through recently. But the idea that we've got is these kind of small pieces, very easy to pick up, very easy to reuse, very ezy to fork and make better, and equally cheap to put down. So you can commit research to our user research, to the user research library. You can put a project on pipeline. You can dip into the show and tells, but you don't necessarily have to take the whole work. You don't necessarily have to pay X thousand pounds per year to buy the thing. You can build on that learning. I think we're really excited when that works well. We know, for example, more about the experience, about how people in Maidstone log on to the Maidstone website than any of us might care to remember for much longer. But that's really exciting collaboration, because that taught us a lot about how we want people to log on to the website in Hackney. So it's difficult. The pitch, I suppose, is we'd be very curious to list our products one day on digital marketplace as free. Why? Because if you're in a buy mentality, then you're not thinking open source build. So if you're in a purchase journey and you suddenly come across a product which actually, where the software license costs are zero, it's going to be very hard for one of our more traditional friends to win that work. We won't be in a position to do that for this round of G-Cloud, but if any of our suppliers who helped us build this open source software were to choose to do that on their own back, well, I'm not afraid, I'm not in a governance position to be able to stop you.
I think also worth talking, I think, a little bit about the local government digital declaration. So one of the key points in that digital declaration, which Hackney was one of the early signatures to, is that collaboration is key. So the latest funding from the local digital fund means that councils have had to collaborate with each other. So there's this push from central government, I think, to try and get people to work together from early on.
But what else does central government need to do to drive that collaboration?
Be open about.
Go ahead.
No, I think be open about their work and pass on their experience with each other. But like, for example, I'm in talks with Waltham Forest. They want to learn what we have gone through, the whole journey. So something like that, if you're open about things, it works. And that's what we say. We work in open, and that's a major drive that we believe in. So yeah, I think that's a major thing that we should be working on.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think there's a huge space actually to build stronger communities of practice across disciplines, across local government. I think while it may not completely be feasible to roll out an entire product together, there's certainly ways of sharing learnings, and from a technology perspective, but also from user research, and actually how can we start to create spaces where these things are shared. There's through open source libraries and through working in the open, there are ways for us to contribute and build patterns, build certain more technical aspects around APIs, around user-facing systems that actually do meet needs across multiple areas. Can we at least start to build like grassroots movements around some of this technology as well? We could start to build this from scratch, but actually, team, let's just grab it from over here, because we went to a meetup last week and we found out that it's already been built. And so I think there's probably more to be done at a grassroots level as well, of sharing knowledge and sharing discipline and things like that too.
I'll just say that one of my experiences of collaboration, and it's, I don't know whether anybody can hear me, was that actually patterns are a good way into this. So one of the things that we've done is we've talked to people about the ways that they've managed feedback, for example. So getting feedback from users is something that we don't do in a particularly disciplined way. It's a bit ad hoc, and people have gone, well, that causes us problems because we can't see what's going on across the organisation. Everything looks a bit different. And we found other people who've got nice patterns for doing that. So we had a lot of conversation with people in Powys, for example. And they said, well, we do it like this. So it's like, oh, actually, that's really good. And we could adopt that just as a piece of thinking. That's really easy to do. Mm-hmm. It's not as detailed as kind of like having to, go through and go, oh, actually, the way that you've set those APIs up, I don't know. No, I wouldn't do it like that. Nice idea. I'll just throw that away and do something similar, right? Which is, if you've ever worked, if you're a developer, you've ever worked with developers, you'll recognise that pattern. So but ideas are something that perhaps are easier for people to start taking on, and it's a way of beginning to get the idea of collaboration. It's kind of like it's a social thing. Quite nice.
Yeah, that's a nice point. We've got another question over here. Ian, this slide, please. I'm enjoying this.
first a point and then a question. You said about sustaining the case for change, and going back to that point, what I've done is you sell that user feedback that you're getting that says how great your service is and how much easier it is to all your stakeholders. And by users, I mean both your external users and also your staff, if you're building anything for your staff. And certainly building stuff for your staff helps spread that internally. And going to the point as well about collaboration and working across, I've recently made the move from central government to local government, and central government has been building stuff for the past 6 years and we're still crap about collaborating and moving stuff across and sharing. I think sometimes it's you don't know what's there, and I think we need to find a better way to understand what's there and what we can use across the piece. Another thing I was interested in, you've put in place, I think, are some of the right and some great ways of working for your team. Is that not a clash with maybe some other ways of working across the council, and how have you managed that? Because from my somewhat bitter, scarred experience, that can be quite a challenge, and I'm really interested to hear how you've managed that.
I was just thinking, so actually we should be massively pleased with how that interface with other colleagues is working. Kate and I led a course shortly before Christmas. We had 3 hours on Agile, 3 hours on Lean Startup, and 3 hours on user-centered design. And we had 9 of the most senior officers in the council turning up at 8 a.m. each morning to come and learn from us. Because we said we built a thing and we said we wanted to try it on some people, and 9 of the most senior people in the building wanted to do that. We're now on version 3 of that. And we've also done that with some colleagues in the NHS as well. So that's been great. And actually, so if you don't make technology the thing, what is the thing? Well, the constants in Hackney are death, taxes, and cuts. What if the challenge isn't to build great user-centered services? What if the challenge is to teach the organisation how to be able to do change better, where that change has the user at its heart, but actually where we need to be in 3 years' time isn't going to be the repairs app that we built last year. So we're talking to the organisation about how to use these techniques to manage complex change. And so it's been really exciting to see some colleagues in an adults PMO use these techniques for better managing the procurement of a carers service. It's been brilliant to see colleagues in public health start to use these concepts around commissioning a sexual health advice service, totally outside of the realm of building a technology thing. So yeah, sometimes it's not so cool, but actually there's lots of reasons to be optimistic.
I think it is about building services so good users prefer to use them. It's also about sharing with other people the ways of working that mean that you can do that at pace and that you can do it openly and you can work in a different way. So picking up on the Agile training, what we also did was follow up with those 9 senior people, a digital buddy each, someone from our team who's there to just go and have a conversation about the problems they're facing, the things that they want to be doing, their frustration around change often. It's not actually about digital, it's not about technology, that's often a tiny bit of it. It's actually about, I want these things to be different and I don't know how to get there, and I can see that you're working in a different way, you're talking differently, your team are different, what is it we want to learn from you? I think we should be massively pleased about that, and not just the beanbags.
Did you want to ask a question about visibility, making things that have been done more visible? That was your other point.
Well, for me, I thought that was a great idea, and I was really cross with myself that we didn't do that at the last. We had to catch up with the Director of Housing yesterday. I was really cross suddenly that we didn't. So we had side-by-side videos showing the thing working on the new thing and the thing working on the old thing, and that's pretty cool. But why didn't we have Grant or Sheila or Yvonne talking about their experience of knocking on someone's door? And thank you. That's what we'll do next.
Next question. Any other questions? I've got some that I can read out that have been submitted. Okay.
So we spoke a little bit today about a lot about building software, in fact, and then we spoke a bit about the cost of maintaining or running the software that we built, and then we spoke a little bit about how to share share the work we've been doing between different authorities. So I was wondering, some of this is pointing a little towards buying software. So I was wondering how decisions get made around build versus buy, particularly at Hackney.
We had a conversation about this at the show and tell earlier today, because I'm still not confident we get it right every time. Sometimes we're constrained by budget sufficiently that we can only buy, and we have to buy the best thing on the market, and we work really hard to do that. I think the important bit of context there is trying not to see ICT budgets as a separate line item, because actually we all know that the costs of a bad system are far greater than the software price that it comes with. So our integrated housing system, because we bought one however many years ago, and we manage gas servicing across 7 different integrated housing systems. Well, that is quite an extraordinary cost that goes with collecting some certificates. So the first thing is making sure that when we're constrained, that we by price, that we buy the best thing that we can, and we see it in the whole service context, not just the whole software life context. But what we are trying to do, particularly in housing, and we've just started doing it in planning as well, particularly with colleagues in Southwark, is stimulating a market that just hasn't shown signs of life, or indeed signs of being a market in any economics definition of the word. So where we can actually show the market, here's the thing. So submit my planning application, which will go live at some point in the next 4 to 6 weeks, is not designed because the London Borough of Hackney wants to long-term provide planning software to 330 odd boroughs in England and Wales. It's designed to show the existing vendors in the market, here's what we think good looks like. And we're providing you the code free, so go and do something better. So it's a stimulant for innovation. It's not a binary choice between buy or build.
So worth talking about Mehta Street as well. That's a really good example, I think, where we...
Yeah, so we had we had a colleague come to us in May last year. I'm going live with a new house and multiple occupancy licensing process, and I want to buy. Should we name them?
Yeah, go on.
Okay. Well, we want to buy the Northgate thing. Do you really, dude? Yeah, I really do. It's great. Okay, we'll give you a project manager, business analyst, because that was our answer to all of life's ills. And she worked diligently for 14 months, and the thing didn't work. And an upgrade meant the thing went 6 times slower. And that was a very opportune moment, 3 months before HMO licensing was about to go live in the borough, to be able to say to that head of service, actually, you know what, maybe there is another game in town. And this particular game was a company called Mehta Street that was backed by a software house in Shoreditch. It runs on AWS, coincidentally, and was set up by 2 licensing officers in Newham. And we, I think, were the first local authority to buy it. It was built using the GovUK design system. It hooks in with GovUK Notify, it hooks in with GovUK Pay, and we were able to spin that up within 6 weeks. Now, in terms of where we'll be in 3 years' time, if Mehta Street doesn't have sufficient business, we'll be one customer of a single supplier, which is also not a comfortable place to be in. But hopefully other people will go and buy Mehta Street, because as far as we can tell, it's the best thing on the market for doing HMO licensing. And then we'll have helped create a new value proposition in the market. And if not, we'll have shown that we're serious, that we're not necessarily going to work with one of the traditional vendor set, and we're prepared to take a punt. Likewise, in housing needs, we worked with a supplier called Jigsaw to support us with the onboarding of the Homelessness Reduction Act. We knew that it didn't do the whole thing, but we knew also that it supported the service with a 42% increase in demand in 3 months, and we're able to do that without any increase in headcount relative to other councils who'd made different decisions, who 6 months on were still struggling with spreadsheets. So that's also about using our commercial nous in a way that says, actually, you know what, this is not an idle threat. If you can't provide software so good people prefer to use it, we will find someone who can, and if we can't, we'll build it ourselves in order to show you what we mean by this thing.
Awesome, thank you.
Other questions?
Just to respond, I'd just like to ask another question around that, really. So we've talked about a lot of systems built by incumbent suppliers that probably don't best meet user needs. But there are starting to be products that are on the market that are available that do begin to meet user needs better. What do we need to do to begin to influence the market further so that actually the skills that you're building within the Hackney team are actually reflected in the teams building the software that you'd ideally prefer to purchase than build yourself? What can we do about that?
I wonder if the best example for me at the moment are the Gov Notify, Gov Pay teams. So they are building software for everybody to use that's free because they're top sliced by central government, but they're building it in such a way that the skills that we've got match perfectly with, you know, their APIs. So GovPay's APIs we can integrate really easily. We understand what they're doing, etc., etc. You compare that to some of the bigger players on the market who will say to you, "Oh yes, no, we've definitely got modern RESTful APIs," and then they give you a 100-page manual. Buried in which somewhere is how the and you just read one, haven't you? Yeah. It's not. I mean, it's not, is it? But they say it is.
Well, that's what you get for your 100 grand a year, right? The manual.
Oh, is that what we're buying?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense. £1 grand a page. Okay. That's why I said densely written. Okay. So for me, that almost so government is a supplier. I think GDS is a supplier to most of central government now, not all of central government, but most of central government, and is starting to be a supplier to local government as well.
So the other dimension, I suppose, is we know how hard it is to recruit great devs. I actually have a performance objectives to lose one of our great devs because we wanted devs to be so good that other people wanted to hire them. Rashmi's not available. So we also know that lots of these pieces of software about which I've just been very rude started off with the best possible intentions and were themselves best in class. And we don't yet have the 5-year overhead of trying to build and maintain a thing. So we've got that to learn too, and I think we need due modesty there. What's the way out of that conundrum? We don't really know, but we're massively excited by our 21 apprentices. And the ability that they're showing, their willingness to learn, the financial model that's underpinning the hiring of apprentices in local government at the moment. We have more apprentices in IT than any other service in the rest of the council. That's politically very popular as well. It's added massively to the diversity of our teams. So investing in apprentices and investing in core skills will be a way that we can further develop that. And a really important part of the apprentices' journey was the time that they spent at AWS. We're really keen that we don't just teach people the Hackney way of doing things, because then they'll be unemployable. So we need to use our relationships to make sure that we're inspiring people to do the best they possibly can.
So it's 21 apprentices. How worried are you about retaining those in the Hackney, or are you not too worried?
Their email address is unpublicly available if that's what you're asking.
So a bit like Matthew's performance objective of losing a dev. I don't have one about losing delivery managers. So just make that really clear. But in terms of measuring success for the apprentices, success isn't keeping all 21. Success is keeping some of them because they move into roles with us as junior devs or as junior delivery managers. But actually success is, do they move on? Do they move on to Amazon? Do they move on to Maidtech? Do they move on somewhere else in Hackney? They're all Hackney local. They either go to school in Hackney or they live in Hackney. So as Matthew said, it's massively helped with the diversity of the team. I want to see them succeed in their career. So the thing that we're really trying to do with them is increase their career aspirations, their networking. How do they then move on to the next thing? And Matthew's absolutely right. We want to teach them the very best cutting edge stuff that will make them really employable. And then we will recruit a second cohort. So it's a rolling program. So we're not expected to keep them all. Some though.
Vilesh, please.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks. I just wanted to touch upon a point that's been mentioned recently about build versus buy. And just going back to some of the legacy applications that we have. So something that myself and Jack have been looking at recently is around emerging technology around robotic process automation. And I guess we get to a stage where there's a balance around replacing legacy applications like your big Northgates, etc., versus putting maybe RPA technology to then make that monolithic process and application less of a burden and less support required and maintenance that's required. So I guess, you know, I don't know if that's an area that's been considered for Hackney or...
Yeah, so we certainly have no organisational appetite to rip out our, in local government it's called revs and bends, council tax and benefits to everyone else. There's no organisational appetite to change Academy, the capital product. And we are using robotics process automation on Academy. Why? Because you can buy Capita's forms, self-service forms for residents to use. That puts data in one part of Academy. You then need a person to put data in another part of Academy in order for that to be processed. That's brilliant, and you pay a annual fee for the API, around which there's no service provision, there's no monitoring or anything in order to get that data from one Capita product to another Capita product. So we are not using a Capita product for the robotics process automation. They're using the brand but not the technology. But we are using RPA to do that. Actually, where RPA, some people are quite rude about RPA, I think wrongly. Where RPA interestingly comes into DevOps is some of the technology on which robotics process automation is built is a little bit flaky, if we're honest. It's kind of screen scraping stuff from the early 90s. So when your software upgrades, the chances are that you need absolute clarity of how the robotics works and where it works and what it's meant to do in order to manage those upgrades. So those same attitudes and mindsets and culture we're trying to build into applications management for the operation of cool Ruby on Rails stuff and sat in the cloud is exactly the same challenge about how we manage stuff that sits on top of legacy software that enables that legacy software to work. If we applied the methods that we've had to date on that, we would find out the robotics is broken when 36 days in, someone goes, oh, it's a little bit weird that we haven't had any X requests for the last 36 days. I wonder why that is. I'll raise a ticket on the ICT support desk. And 5 days later, someone had passed the ticket from one part of IT to another part of IT. And then one day we'd find out that there were 96 applications for housing needs that no one knew existed because they were just sat there because robotics process automation had died. So that would be a classic, you know, old traditional IT method. So robotics process automation, very long way of saying, yes, we're really interested. We think it has genuine potential to make legacy applications better, but we are as nervous about how we manage it on top of legacy applications as we are for some of our cool new stuff.
Can I ask a question about how you sort of keep control over things? You mentioned that you don't have a digital plan, strategy, what have you. So I came from central government as well, and I came to local government. And when I went to some of my first meetings, every meeting I went to was like, I'm some from parking, I'm from planning, I want this system. It's that sort of thing, I want it off from the shelf. And those areas that have the actual funding revenue, they seem to be the ones that be able to get what they want. They're the rich kids who can take what they want. And linked to that is that if we're trying to sort of build these sort of common components, reusable modules, you still get the business sort of saying, this is what I want, this is what we need. And when they say we, they mean internally. They don't talk about the external customer. They just talk about, we've always had a system, this is a new version, this is what we want. So in terms of that sort of governance, because otherwise it's a bit like painting the fourth bridge. Every time you try and create something, someone's gone out and bought 2 new things of exactly the same thing. How do you keep sort of control of, well, oversight of what's happening across the piece, some form of governance to make sure that people aren't going off buying 4 different asset management systems, and so that when you are spinning up these new things, that you are then sort of saying, right, this is available, use this instead of going out and just buying the next big thing. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, the big, to deliberately sound provocative, the big thing I'd like to leave you with is worry less. And the reason's this. So I inherited a team which did 2-year projects for a generic thing that the whole organisation needed to use. And the team had gone from My Office, which was our pet name for the VDI. It still sounds like a venereal disease to me. It's quite like a venereal disease to use. We'd had a similar length project for the EDRMS. We'd had a 2-year project for CRM. we closed a 2-year project for a corporate booking system. At the end of the 2-year project, we didn't deliver a corporate booking system. So relative to the benefits of trying to take lots of people through a 2-year program to do a thing, actually when you're buying software as a service, what are the real costs in 3 different people having slightly different booking systems? Pretty relaxed about that in the grand scheme of things. Certainly don't want to be sat in a project board with people where you've got one person who wanted it last month and one person who doesn't really want it at all, but you're trying to force them both together for the beauty of IT architectural consistency. Actually, the overall approach has been worry less. In terms of the buy criteria, it's the GovUK Technology Code of Practice. So every single piece of technology we buy gets assessed against the Code of Practice. Some vendors are starting to actually get quite good at it. It's quite impressive. We've had 2 really good responses recently. But getting the vendor to articulate how it meets user needs, where by that we mean users, we don't mean council staff, has been a really interesting journey for some of them. So the key principle is make sure the software meets user needs, not make sure we only have one piece of software that does the thing. Over time, we're migrating people to GovUK Notify. We probably have 4 or 5 different SMS delivery systems at the moment. Reasonably relaxed about that. When the next one comes up for renewal, we'll try and shift them to Notify. We've got 3 different payment gateways that we know of. When the next one comes up for renewal, we'll try and nudge them to GovUK Pay. But it doesn't seem worth investing a huge amount of organisational energy or leadership credibility in thou shalt use this because these people on the 4th floor think that it's the right thing for everyone.
Yes, and in terms of governance, there is some governance around if you want to buy a IT thing, the IT director has to agree that you're going to buy the thing. So there is a mechanism for stopping people going out and buying a really big thing without actually telling us. So we do still, I'm sure everyone's going to nod when I say this, you know, in another part of the woods, you do come across someone going, oh, I'm just about to buy this really big thing and I haven't actually thought to ask IT about it. So there is a method of stopping people, but really the trick is getting in early and having the conversation. So one of our business relationship managers was having a conversation with one of the teams recently, and he started with, I want to buy this shiny bit of technology that I heard about at a conference, and through conversation and discussion and thinking about user needs, actually now what he's going to do, or we are going to do, is something very different. So it is about getting in and having those conversations.
Well, I think it links back to shared services in a sort of slightly tortured analogy, if you will. But it's this, that my knowledge of shared services, limited though it is that they fail when the whole thing isn't aligned. And so the challenge we had that I saw around the corporate bookings project and that I could see emerging around the CRM thing was that you can align people around the tech, but if their users are different and if their governance is different, they'll be making different decisions. So the challenge comes if you're trying to make 2 enforcement teams work in the same way, but they're reporting on different PIs to different people with different budgets. And then the system will be the thing that everyone blames for the fact that actually they haven't got their governance, they haven't got their systems and processes worked out, and then the software just bears the brunt of that failure to align properly.
Okay, we'll shortly be doing drinks and sort of networking and hopefully carrying on this conversation. Any final question from anybody? Last question? Oh yes, we have. Martin. Here we go. Come on in.
It seems a bit mundane, but I'm going to ask it anyway because Matthew just mentioned the planning project with Southwark Council where we've been looking at run a discovery funded by MHCLG with Hackney as a partner. And one of the things I'm worried about is that we've identified an MVP that would handle a bit of the process, but it would have to run in parallel to existing suppliers. You're all familiar with them. IDOCS, Northgate, a few others. With universal housing, and I'm going to make this sound easy, you were able to integrate, you were able to write your own APIs on top of it. And I'm sure they were delighted to make that as easy as possible for you to do that, and very willing for you to share those APIs with anybody else using universal housing. But when that's not an option, because I've not had an awful lot of, I think, Luke, you mentioned maybe we run this discovery so it raises the bar for the existing suppliers to do a better job.
Yeah.
I've not really got much engagement in that area, to be honest, through the discovery. It's only 8 weeks. Maybe if we go to Alpha, they'll pop up and say, yeah, we'd love to work with you. This won't happen quickly, that councils will move away. So I know Hackney are going through a procurement process for the next one. I know that Southwark are halfway, just about to go from one iDux product to another, which is taking a year and costing £1 million, which is wonderful. But there's no possibility, I don't think, of us being able to build APIs on top of those existing services. So we're going to be delivering an MVP that's got to run in parallel to existing systems. So you don't get the software cost savings, you've got extra workload because people are going to have to move from one system to another. It seems like a big ask. Advice. Probably Luke.
Yeah, thanks.
What's the answer, Luke?
I think it is a huge challenge, right? And I think there might be ways of potentially slicing the way that we approach this and focus it around particular users and user needs and user groups potentially in order to understand who we can move across. You basically faced with this situation where you do need to run two things in parallel, then what are your options? And I think if they are your only options, you do have to begin to understand how the various users are interacting with these existing systems, and is there a way of us looking at the business processes or the various departments or types of people performing a particular activity within that system, and actually can we begin to move groups of people away and begin to free them from needing access to that data. But ultimately you will have people looking across two systems. I think it's like, how do we move as quickly as possible to reduce that journey? What I don't think you don't want to be doing this overnight, right? You don't want to have this go live where your entire organization kind of shifts over from one system to another. You can't do that. So what are the ways of shortening that time, but actually focusing on how can we get entire groups of people to move across at once rather than whole organizations? And how do we take an agile approach in this pretty nasty situation?
So rather than going for big bang approach, do it in slices and have a review and release processes in between. So this is how we have tackled when it came for us for housing. So we made sure that our processes are quite clear and just jump, rather than jumping on that opportunity, release in small chunks, and I reiterate them every day.
But the same problem exists when you can integrate and access data away from a legacy system. You're still pulling service by service effectively away from these systems, and you are essentially still straddling the two as well. And so I don't think either approach is perfect. I think it's about optimizing for getting through it as hopefully as quickly as possible, and actually focusing on user needs all the way through.
Is it about focusing on delivering enough value with the new thing that users will be okay with having two systems? It's reminding me of the Passport Services case study around the new online passport service. When that first went up in beta, only a small subsection of people applying for passports could actually use it. That you couldn't use it if it was your first passport, you couldn't use it for a child, you couldn't use it if there was any sort of problem actually, and it was just a slice of their users who could use this new system. So it was running in parallel with an existing system. It took them ages to extend it out so that actually they could remove some of the, and I'm sure, I'm thinking back to the case, I'm sure in the back end they were using two systems for a long time, but it was delivering enough value that everyone was on board with doing that. And I think it also creates the case for change then, because then the suppliers are forced to start to think, actually, my system is the legacy one that people are moaning about, and there's this shiny new thing over here and it's coming for us. And actually, if we don't react, we don't do something about it.
I think, at the risk of ending on a slightly pessimistic note, the planning is a real opportunity, because you've got a refresh in the data cycle. So we receive 100 planning applications sometimes a week, So you can start putting those into a new system. The bit that most excites me and makes me most nervous at the same time is social care, where the one thing that people lose their jobs for in local government is if you fragment the data. Applying the strangler pattern to a social care system is high risk. We haven't done it yet, but equally, if in 3 years' time we haven't transformed the way that social care interacts with technology and data, personally, I'll have failed.
Something for us to continue discussing our drinks, I think, that one, Matthew. So we'll move to the next part of the evening, which is drinks and networking. Are we doing it just here, Katie? But it's okay, so we might need to prompt them. And are we allowed to sort of take drinks outside and enjoy the views and chat? Yes. Okay. Okay. So the drinks are on the way? Yeah. Okay. So whilst we wait for drinks, any final questions or any closing remarks? Anyone else with a question? Here's the drinks. Chris. Yes.
So Matthew, you spoke a bit about the restructure you did 14 months ago, which is now fast out of date. I think we spoke a little bit as well about the desire of the chief exec, I think, to not buy some more software that's going to reach end of life. So I was wondering if you had similar thoughts around like organisation restructures and that kind of being rather than the kind of big bang thing that happens periodically, whether there's some ongoing efforts around that. I was wondering if you had any thoughts in that regard.
How we work beyond boundaries is a key issue which emerged in our staff survey this year, and there's a sense, I think, in local government that the cuts have taken some of the glue out of our services. So some of those kind of facilitative things that help join the dots, some of the time and space for people to do that sort of networking just doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, we're doing a whole bunch of cultural things to try and support people working beyond boundaries. We've got Let's Network Hackney, which is a brand for randomised coffee trials, where people get to meet each other from around the organisation. That's been reasonably popular. We're doing a thing at the moment with directors where they shadow each other silently for a day. So we put housing, adult services together with housing, because there's lots of interdependencies there. So I think we come from a culture where you can't do anything until you've restructured, and then the restructure changes the world, and then everyone just works differently because you come to the same desk with your old ID badge, but you're paid at a slightly different grade, so therefore you act differently because that's how it works, right? Actually, the biggest change, I think, in our team was when we moved out of being on 3 different outhouses into the Hackney Service Centre, and suddenly you could see everyone who worked with us. Yeah. That was quite a change. That was a big one. So actually, putting less importance on, hierarchy diagrams that no one's updated on the internet, and far more importance on people talking to people, and having a shared language to do it. And I think that's where user needs can be so valuable, because you're talking about the people you're here to serve. And in Hackney, we're particularly fortunate because our service centre is where we work. We get 100,000 visitors a year into the service centre to drop off documents, to when they're evicted from their homes and they turn up with the 2 kids in school uniform and the buggy and the luggage, or when they're here to celebrate getting married or having a baby. So we have that daily reminder, as I know colleagues in Camden and others do. So being able to help people work beyond boundaries by putting users at the heart is far more important than organisational redesign, I think.
That was slightly more positive to end on.
Okay, so can I ask everybody just to show their appreciation for the panel, please? Thanks for your insights, and thank you particularly for your candour. It was really refreshing. So last remaining thing to do is thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your involvement and your questions. Really like that debate to continue. And right on cue, we've got sort of drinks and nibbles. I think the sun has just come out. So if we move over to this side and then continue the discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.